Welcome, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Camp, Vice President with the Ames Chamber of Commerce, here to do another interview with our state legislators. We're happy to welcome today Representative Dave Dio, who represents Nevada and some parts of eastern and northern and southern Story County. Representative, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Look back on the tax reform, income tax reform that was done in 2018. We know it had some positive impacts, and that's something we've talked a lot about, but we're still 48th in corporate and 42nd in individual income tax for the tax foundation. So what can we look at possibly doing in the 2020 session to kind of make some improvements to the income tax structure?
So just to go back and kind of go over it with, for anybody who's watching, what we did was it was a phased in change in the taxes. So at this point, what most people have seen is maybe a very small cut in the rates. We cut everybody's income tax rates, and that's already gone into effect. As we go forward, as some of these changes get phased in, and one of them is a business depreciation. Has already gone into effect, I believe, just this last week. But individuals won't be taking those off until they do their taxes next year. And then as we move forward, we're going to start lowering those top rates for both personal and also for corporate. But we have to reach certain growth levels in order to do that. I would advocate that what we should do, we've already seen the benefits of the first part of this. We've already seen more economic growth than we thought. LSA, when they told us what they thought revenue was going to be, we're overshooting those estimates. I think they've underestimated what the positive benefits of this have been. We're seeing right now sales tax revenues growing at 8%. They knew they were going to grow because we did some things with online sales tax, but it's actually growing at an even faster rate than that. And I believe the reason is people have more money in their pockets and they're actually spending that money, and that's more sales tax revenue. And so I think what we should do is I think we should move some of those, implement some of this stuff a little sooner. And one of the things we could do on the 179 deductions for businesses, we could move that forward and make it retroactive to this last year. If we do it early enough in session, people can start taking that deduction off of their taxes right now. And there's sort of a practical benefit to doing that from a budgetary standpoint for the legislature, because we have a large surplus. There's going to be a lot of demand for, well, how do we spend this surplus? And I believe one of the things we could do is make that retroactive, and then that basically gets funded with those surplus funds. Would fund the current shortfall. We'd have to come up with money to fund that. The good thing is going forward then, because somebody's already depreciated an item and expensed it, going forward it actually means more revenue to the state because they've got fewer deductions on that same item in future years. So the LSA is going to score that as a benefit to revenue in years going forward, and so it doesn't hurt our chances of actually implementing these phased-in tax cuts. And then I think you just move everything up a year, and we'd see some of those get implemented a little faster.
And then we would hope to see how those positive attributes,
absolutely
positive associations that come with it.
Yeah.
Here with Representative Beth Wetzel, who largely represents the southern part of Ames in her district. The changes to Iowa's income tax in 2018 have been impactful, but Iowa still rates 48th in corporate income tax and 42nd in individual income tax per the tax foundation. So what needs to be done to continue to improve Iowa's income tax structure at the corporate and individual level?
I'm seeing a lot of that. Iowa, from a lot of perspectives, is a good place to start a business and a good place to do business. I mean, CNBC has given us an A+. Forbes ranks Ames as the number 8 place for a small business or a small place for business. It looks like we're in good shape for businesses. I am concerned about some of the tax implications for Iowa citizens, and that a lot of it is being placed back onto the citizens from the tax cuts that we've given. We haven't seen a lot of relief for middle class and lower middle class.
Okay. And part of the reason that's listed in there as well, because I mentioned that 5/8 of that remaining after Iowa would be kicked in. One of the things we hear talked about and we would advocate for is looking at possibly how can we address some income tax issues as well, using potentially some of that sales tax increase that would come from part of that 5/8. Yeah. So just kind of, that's something that we'll be looking at as we go into session as well.
I have a feeling there will be a lot of fighting over that 5/8 cents if
Everyone and their
If
mom
we
is going to want some of
find-
it. Yep.
Right.
Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Jerry Bain. Senator, thanks for being with us here today.
It's my pleasure, Drew. I look forward to coming and talking to you.
We touched on this topic quite a bit already too, but the income tax reform that was done back in 2018, has had an impact. We just talked, for example, Section 179 before, how big of an impact that's going to have on that.
And I'm glad you brought it, because we talked about that before we got started, but I want to make a big deal about the fact that as of January 1st, Section 179 is now fully coupled with the feds. That has been a sticking point for me for I don't know how many years down there. I've been pushing that and pushing that and pushing that, because it really makes a huge difference, particularly to small business owners.
And
we know that, what is it, 60 some odd % of all business growth comes from small business.
The vast majority.
So when you talk about something that literally affects a small businessman, it can have a direct impact on the expansion that they can make and the way they can hire employees. That is a huge deal. And Iowa was so far out of whack. To put this in perspective, 2 years ago, Iowa was only $30,000 of depreciation. Now it's $1 million.
And that's the big thing. The consistency piece is coupling.
The consistency pieces and the whole deal that we had not kept up with inflation in the machinery area. I mean, machinery that used to cost $100,000 now costs $500,000, that sort of thing. Well, our depreciation had just not kept up, and so we were at a competitive disadvantage. So this is so big, and I'm so excited about it that I can't tell you the difference it'll make to small businesses across the state. That is huge.
And one big thing to remember too is the fact that obviously ag is a huge factor in the sector in our state, but also construction and construction and ag equipment manufacturing are hugely important, and that assists those as well.
So that's going to make a big deal. And as part of that tax reform that we passed, and I think it was last year, there are certain triggers that take place, and as those triggers are met, and by the way, I have to bring this up. It's a little bit, see, I told you so type of thing, but during the debate, we were told if you pass these tax reductions, you're going to bankrupt our state. And we said, well, that's sure is funny, because that's not what happened last time we passed tax reductions. Well, reality is we have more revenue coming in now than we had before. And we're very close to hitting those triggers. And my wish is that we do go ahead and hit those triggers and get that taken care of, and we can continue to be more competitive, because we're competing with Texas, who has no income tax at all. We're competing with Florida, has no income tax at all. We're competing with Nevada, has no income tax at all. Well, I don't care what your rate is, it's higher than zero. And so when you're at a competitive disadvantage, and we need to continue to work down that path, anything we can do to trigger that and lower those rates and still maintain the funds necessary to take care of state government, to me, this is a win-win situation. And I'm genuinely excited if we can hit those triggers and make those reductions, because that's the other thing is business or corporate tax rates are one of the highest in the country. We're competitive.
Still 48.
Bad disadvantage there. So we want to get that down as well. So that's just a huge deal.
Yeah, and we look forward to working with you on that, just like we did a couple years ago on the last package.
Yep.
We now welcome Senator Annette Sweeney, who represents Northern Story County, Eastern Story County, and all the way over towards Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Dike, New Hartford. Senator, thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, you bet. This is always a fun time to be able to visit, and also to hear input from other individuals about what we've got going on.
And one of the big things, too, obviously, once again, as a business advocacy organization, it should be no surprise that we always are watching the income tax and the tax structure. So the changes we made in 2018 have been very impactful, especially now that we see some of them coming into effect. So the fact of the matter, though, it still remains that not all of them have come into effect. So Iowa still ranks 48th for corporate income tax and 42nd for individual income tax. That's per the Tax Foundation. So what are some things we can maybe look at doing this session to further, continue to increase our the progress, and the effectiveness of our income tax system?
With our income tax system, I know that in Ways and Means we are going to be looking very astutely with our property taxes, see where they're at. And then our corporate taxes, some people want to take a look at our tax incentives that we have, but we can't take those all away because you got to be paying taxes to get those tax incentives. And we can't cloud that issue with, well, I don't think that somebody should have tax incentives. Well, they have to make money in order to have those incentives. So that's why we need to encourage people to come to our areas. And so I know that within Ways and Means, we are going to take some really good hard looks at those.
And I know, too, I mentioned that Debbie, Director Durham, was in town today, and she's always talked a lot about having a meaningful conversation. She's more than welcomes those conversations about the ROI and the effectiveness of the programs as well.
Yes.
So that's an important thing to note all the time, too, for any naysayers potentially out there.
Yes.
And we're very grateful today to be with Representative Ross Wilburn. He represents part of North Ames in the seat previously held by Representative Heddens, now Supervisor Heddens. Representative Wilburn, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you, and thanks to the viewers out there. It's great to be here.
Changes to Iowa's income tax system in 2018 have been impactful, but Iowa still rates 48th in corporate income tax, 42nd in individual income tax. That's per the Tax Foundation. What needs to be done to continue continue to improve Iowa's income tax structure at the corporate and individual level?
Those are a couple indicators that you mentioned. I think it's important to look at a broad array of indicators in terms of how we're doing with our tax system. Certainly there may be some individual components of the Iowa tax code that may seem unfair compared to other communities. But when you look at them in total, what's the overall effect? In Wall Street, best and worst run states in America, Iowa ranked number 5, and they stated that Iowa is fiscally well managed with a relatively well balanced budget. We have some questions about what the priorities might be, but Forbes listed Ames as the number 8 community in terms of best small places for business careers. Forbes also said Iowa ranked 13th in best states for business. So it's important to look at the breadth of those and dig down into what the indicators are. And if I remember right, one of the CNBC's ranking of America's top communities where Iowa had struggles with was workforce, infrastructure, and technology and innovation. And so technology and innovation, that speaks to Iowa State and the importance of helping support Iowa State that's creating the next workers. We want to be able to keep them here. Workforce, we've just had an extended conversation about the importance of supporting the workforce with childcare and housing and infrastructure. I've done RAGBRAI several years, and you can't travel around the state in car or bike or canoe without looking at some of the places where we've not invested for the future and just looking at it right now. So we don't want to be short-sighted in terms of investing in people and places. It just because you end up pushing the burden of what taxes we do pay on the next generation is certainly not something that we want to do.
Yeah, and that's one of our top issues as well, which we'll discuss a little bit later, is the transportation and connectivity and kind of the technology piece. But I'm glad you mentioned, too, the waterways, because not only when you look at water quality, but when you look at locks and dams, I think a lot of times people forget when you hear the word infrastructure how critical those are, especially when you have 2 massive rivers bordering each side of the state. So that's something I'm glad you mentioned that as well. Thank you, Ames Chamber of Commerce members, for watching. Please do come back and listen to the next audio interviews with our next few questions for our state legislators next week.